And I want to thank everyone for being here today. Antoine Thompson, Executive Director for Greater Washington Region Clean Cities Coalition. Uh, we're going to have a great conversation today. This is part one of a series that we will be doing around fleet equity planning. Greater Washington Region Clean Cities will be releasing a fleet equity guide in October of this year. We've been working on it for some time, and so that'll be available for fleets, but we will continue to have a number of these knowledge sharing and also some conversations as well. We'll give a chance to give you all an opportunity to talk about what you're doing around fleet equity as well, and give you some feedback as well. And so the fleet guide will be available in October. We'll formally release it at our conference on October 4th in Largo, Maryland. We'll have a nice panel. Hopefully, Steve, you'll come in town for that, and they can see you in person, not just in cyberspace. And we'll formally release that. It'll be on our website. We'll have a PDF for you as well. And then we'll also have, it'll be on the Environmental Defense Fund's website as well. We also will have two more listening sessions as well. So you'll be able to come. We'll have them they'll both will be in person over the next month and a half before we release our report. So I wanted to the guide. So I wanted to share that with you. I want to take just a moment to have a couple quick announcements as well. First, we're going to have on Thursday a Bridging the Gap with Charging as a Service webinar. Will be on Thursday at 11 a.m. As well, 11 to noon. And that's really targeted for some of the fleet, especially the school districts, but others as well, charging as a service. The more economical way for you to try to electrify your fleet. We also will be counting down to International Biodiesel Day. So we will have a forum on that as well. We'll have a number of great speakers talking about biodiesel and our stakeholder meeting. We'll also talk about some electric stuff as well. We're going to have Councilmember Charles Allen, who's leading the effort in DC to put 7,500 chargers on the roads and in the parks and everywhere else in DC. So, but August 10th is our next stakeholder meeting from 10 to 11. We're going to have a big focus on biodiesel, but we'll also have some remarks from Councilmember Allen talking about what he's doing in the electric vehicle space for the District of Columbia as well. Just the last two last things. One is registration opens today for the Greater Washington Region Clean Cities annual conference and expo that will take place on October 4th from 8 a.m. all the way to 6 p.m. We'll have a display of about 30 to 40 vehicles. We'll have for those who are in the procurement space, you'll be able to do some vending. We're going to have a exhibitor space, not only for different fuels and vehicles, but also suppliers. So we're going to have a green expo in there as well to supply, let vendors showcase some of their wares as well. We'll have an awards luncheon too. We'll have a we'll have 7 panels. We'll have a number of high profile speakers as well. And then we'll end with a nice happy hour. How about that, Mr. Ray Cooper? We'll have that as well. So early bird registration starts today. So you can go and register today for the conference. And we'll be giving away a number of industry awards as well at that event. If you are not a member, we strongly encourage you to become a member today. We just one of our members, we just helped them, our team and some of our project partners help Prince George's County Fleet win a generous award from the state of Maryland. That's what we do. We help small and big with people trying to get some of these resources that are out here. Without further ado, I want to get right into our speaker. We have, I'll be sharing, but I'm going to have Steve go first today. Steve King has more than 15 years of experience. He's the senior manager of electrical fleet programs and projects at the Electrification Coalition. He has 15 years of experience developing and leading sustainability-focused projects. He specializes in working with companies on creating pathways for emerging leaders of color, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and in the clean energy and transportation sectors. Steve is a senior manager at Electrification Coalition. He implemented decarbonization initiatives with private companies through the deployment of battery electric vehicles. Steve launched the Electric Freight Consortium, a collective that facilitates a peer-to-peer collaboration on strategies and actions that will accelerate freight electrification at scale. He has recruited over 35 industry leaders now participating in the consortium. Consortium members include Nike, Nestle, Panasonic, and Volvo, and many, many others. He is the founder and former CEO and leader of Barack Obama Green Charter High School in New Jersey. All right. Steve worked with the Global Labor Institute at Cornell University as well, where he focused on green jobs and design of the low carbon economy. And without further ado, we'll welcome Steve. Let's give a nice virtual hand clap for Steve today. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So we're going to give, how we're going to work this today is we're going to give him a chance to share some insights on approaches to fleet equity. I'm going to give you some tidbits of things that you need to do to start the process of planning for fleet equity. Then we'll give some of the folks on the Zoom a chance to talk about what their organization is doing and some of the approaches that you're making and steps you're making. And then we'll talk about how we can help and give you some tidbits. When we get to the conference in October, we'll have an even more in-depth conversation, and we'll also give you some things you can take away with as well. Well, you get some things today, but you'll give you something real tangible in terms of a link and some other things. But Steve, the floor is yours. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
All the way from California. He's all the way from California, going back to Cali.
Now, I have to say, I always say this, I'm Brooklyn born and bred. So I may be in California, but I'm a Brooklyn guy in my heart. So just want to make that clear. Okay. All right. All right, great. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. And I'm happy to be with you all today to kind of talk about best practices and also some of the challenges in really being able to put equity into your fleet electrification projects. It is an area that we need to have more focus and more work. There's a lot of mandates coming in from the federal government in terms of making sure that, you know, you're looking at Justice 40, but how fleets do it, the support they need to make it happen, how does it look on the ground is a very different situation. I'm not sure if they have my do you have my presentation? If not, I can just go off the top without needing the slide deck.
She has it. You have it, right, Laurel?
Well,
give me 1 second.
Well, let's just go with the information, and we can make the slide available after the conversation. So when we talk about best practices in terms of,
can you pull it up?
I don't have it, and it never came through.
Steve, I'm going to make you a co-host, and if you can pull it up, that'd be great.
Okay.
Can you make him a co-host because you have the controls?
Yes.
And then you can pull it up, okay, Steve?
You got it. Okay, let's see. I will share my screen. Can everybody see my screen now? Yep. Okay, great. So one of the things that organizations really struggle around, especially when it comes to deploying electric vehicles, is internal alignment. So what do I mean by that? The first item is really commitment.
I'm sorry. Can you hit the present button? Then it'll make it larger. It's down on the bottom right.
Okay.
It's next to move left. Yep. Ooh, ooh, right. One more over. There it is.
Okay, there we go. Thank you.
You're
All right. I need as much help as I could get. I really appreciate it.
welcome.
So again, when we talk about deployment of electric vehicles, there are many challenges, right? Funding is always a big challenge. But part of this challenge is also internal alignment within the organizations. And this really starts with a commitment from leadership and also various department heads. I can't tell you some of the conversations I've had with some organizations where there's a commitment from leadership to making this happen, and it's part of their ESG goals. But then when you are actually talking with fleet managers and others involved in the process, they also have other concerns. They're concerns about budget, about moving vehicles, about total cost of ownership. And so when they're looking at all that, the issues of equity don't necessarily come into play. And so when you talk about internal alignment, you've got to make sure that the leadership has this as part of their deliverables, the board has it as part of their goals, and that everyone within the organization, especially those who are making decisions, are also focused on the issue of equity. Now, part of this is that if you don't have internal champions, if you don't have people helping to lead this through and usher this through an organization, it doesn't happen. It falls to the side because there are so many competing priorities that items around equity don't necessarily come to the forefront. And so there may be a desire by the organization to move forward with issues of equity. It may be part of a funding project that they're going for, and so they have to demonstrate that. But you have to make sure that there are people that can carry this forward within your organization and move the needle in terms of making sure that it gets ushered through some of the roadblocks that occur within the organization. So internal champions are important. Now, these things are not necessarily in order, but the other item that is critical in the beginning is who do you have at the table for planning and shared decision-making, right? Because if you don't have people that are impacted by the work that you do, where you have your depots located, where your truck's going through, those other issues of equity, if they're not at the table in the planning process, they are missing from the conversation. And it is so critical to make sure that you've had those people at the table. And sometimes you've got to go beyond just your assumptions about what someone presents, right? You've got to make sure that they are connected to that community, that they understand the issues of equity, and that that's also part of the things that they're focused in on. And so it's critical that the people that you have at the beginning of the planning process are there to kind of help provide their viewpoint and their perspective, especially on the project planning, but even more importantly, on the funding. So when people talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, that's what inclusion looks like. It looks like making sure that those parties are at the table and that they have the power to make decisions, to allow their perspectives heard, and to have that value within the organization. And I always say this, that if it's value, then it's got to be written down, and then there has to be accountability, right? So let's make sure that when we say that that's what we're focusing and doing, that it actually has teeth to it. Okay. So the other thing is that typically fleet organizations are not designed to do equity work. So that means that you've got to do your research. You've got to understand, who does your fleet impact, right? What are the communities that are present for either where your truck routes are located or where your depots are located? And there's plenty of data out there, especially put out by the federal government, to kind of talk about these historically disadvantaged communities and communities of color that exist throughout the US. And so it's important that you do your research to find this out. And that means that you've got to go outside of the circle of your own organization typically, right? And so this goes to another point that we'll get to a little further down the line, which is relationship building. So once you start to be able to do the research, understand the communities that are impacted, that is also part of who you bring in into your inclusion planning and decision-making process. Now, equity is a very soft issue people like to talk about. We want to, make sure that people have a sense of belonging. But the fact is also you've got to make sure that you're looking at data, right? And many organizations are not set up to record this information, to measure and monitor it. And so you've got to make sure that you use the proper tools to be able to talk about how the impact is happening, where it's taking shape, and what's the process. So measure, but more importantly, share this information. Because if you Google right now, fleet equity, and you see what comes up, there's no information, there's hardly any information. And I could tell you that I was working with the NAACP's climate committee. And when we were doing research on building electrification, the companies that didn't want to share, that didn't have the information to share, was stunning. So it is important that you share this information. One, it shows that you're serious about your work, right? And we all start from a place, sometimes it's 0, sometimes it's 5, but people understand that you're starting from some point. The other thing is that when you share this information, other companies and organizations that are not necessarily doing the work or have all the answers can look at this, and you can start a dialogue. And I could tell you, I've been to the ACT Expo and ACT, and I've been to so many of these events, and Antoine's been there with me. I've seen him and we've talked. That many times what we hear is that partnership is the new leadership. If you're going to do a project, it's important to partner with others. But part of sharing that information is that you open up a dialogue with others, right? Use the information for decision-making. If you're not using data, and I think in your daily jobs, everyone is using data for decision-making, but when you're talking about the issues of equity, it's so important to understand exactly what the impact is and then make adjustments, because no plan or program is going to be perfect from the beginning. And so it's important to make sure that you make adjustments. The real key to making equity work within your organization in deploying your electric freight projects is to build relationships. Again, most of these companies, you're designed to transport goods, provide a service. You're not designed as an equity company. And so you've got to build those relationships with community partners and make sure that you're also putting forward community needs and initiatives and concerns. And why is this important? Many communities who are historically disadvantaged understand that companies oftentimes have a project, have money to spend, and they're coming into these communities to do their project. So they're parachuting in and then they're leaving. And believe me, I could tell you that many of these communities I've talked to throughout the US understand and see that. And it's a barrier to making sure that your electrification project sticks, that it has issues of equity centered in it. And when you do that, you miss out on the opportunity of building relationships that will help you with other projects down the road. Number one. Number two, when we talk about being able to recruit talent, and I do a lot of this with other companies, talent is really about the relationship that you establish with people. And I can tell you that establishing great community relationships and great partnerships allows you to look at how you're bringing in talent, and especially diverse talent. So building a relationship is so important. Start with community partners and make sure that you support, understand, and forward community initiatives. Find community leaders and not just politicians, right? Antoine, you're a great example of someone who has a political experience, has a community experience, and it's so important that you look at the community leaders as well to figure out who are the key folks that you can get involved in your project, because they will help shepherd these projects through the community. They will help aggregate the voice of the community. They'll tell you where the hot spots are located. And so it's important to have them as people that you are working with for your projects. you have to have a variety of factions within the community to discuss the needs and priorities. Now, this is near and dear to my heart, right? As an African-American, people typically think the African-American community is monolithic, right? There's only one issue that we focus in on. There is no community, there's no sector of people that are just one issue. And so you've got to bring in the various factions of the community to talk about their needs and concerns. Whether you look at the elderly, whether you look at parents, whether you look at those who are working within the community, you've got to bring in various factions within the community, hear the diversity of voices that are presented so that you have a full breadth and width of how you can be effective with your project and your plan. And the last point, which is one of the most important, is center the needs and wants of the community first. And when you do that, you can find that place where both your goal and the community goals intersect. But if you're coming in with your project and the community's needs are secondary, people really understand that. And they look at many of the corporations and say, you're just doing this because this is something that you want to have happen. It's not something that we want to have happen. And all the conversations we have about transportation electrification, everyone is key on making sure that there are charging stations in our communities, that there's some rebates. So my question is, when a community is dealing with issues of education, housing, how is that being centered in your work, right? If my salary doesn't allow me to purchase a new vehicle, that rebate that you're talking about doesn't really impact me. So you've got to bring that to the forefront. You've got to start with their needs first. And having worked for a long time in the environmental space, I'm old enough to remember when people would say, Black folks or folks of color are not really interested in the environment. Well, if you're talking about polar bears, no, not really. Okay. Why? Because you're not making the issue real for me where I live and the impact that it has on me, my family, and my economic future. Right. And so if you don't look at those issues, if you don't understand that, if that's not part of your conversation, then the project that you're looking to happen is not going to really take shape. All right. Now, because there's hundreds of billions of dollars right now going out for electrification transportation projects, everyone is becoming companies that, again, don't focus on this, are taking the lead and looking for support and looking to do this work. You've got to make sure that you have equity specialists working with your team. I can't tell you how important that is. Just asking someone their opinion because they present as a person of color or the communities that you want to impact doesn't mean that they are a specialist in the work, right? So bring in the specialists, have the conversations with them. And when you do that, you will be amazed at the amount of information that you will get in order to move your project forward. And more importantly, it just doesn't affect your transportation projects. When you have those specialists talk to you about how to do this work that has impact and that can stick, they can provide information for you for other aspects of the work that your company is doing. And so it's critical to be able to facilitate these relationships. This is why relationships are so important, because they pay dividends in so many other ways. It's not just about business and getting contracts. It's also about how do you make sure that you're catering to the needs of your of the folks that you cater to, your stakeholders, and how you're building a process to be able to utilize those relationships for a variety of other things. Now, how to make this work stick. Companies are pretty good at talking about their products, but you've got to talk about the work you're doing in the space of equity as well. And sometimes it means you've got to make sure that you're bringing in storytellers. There's a guy who I follow named Gary Vee who talks about business and making sure that people are bringing empathy into the work that they're doing. And he's very big on making sure that you're telling stories and you're using all the social media platforms. You've got to bring people in that can bring your story out. I was working with NOAA, which is the Ocean and Atmospheric Agency. And they were saying to me, Steve, we're trying to really make sure that we get folks of color that stay with the organization and that we can recruit them. We're having a problem with this. And I said, well, who is NOAA? Really, what is the message that people know about NOAA versus Google? Now, if I was a young person, who would I want to work for, right? If you don't have a great story to tell, if you don't put your story out there, no one's going to know. And again, when you put your story out there and you start the process, you start to develop relationships. So it's important that you're getting your story out. And many organizations are looking to hire storytellers, social media people in order to make sure that their story gets out. And this is one aspect of your story that has to get out. And using the data and sharing that information shows that you're serious and that you're making strides. Now, get help, because you all need help, right? Again, this is not the work that you typically do. And so it's important that you make sure that you're asking questions, because you don't know what you don't know. Unless this is your space, unless this is your lane, you really don't know what you don't know. So listen, ask questions, work with others, and be open to it. You've got to have a growth mindset, because if you don't, you're already making assumptions and limiting the ability of your work to have impact. All this put together, I could tell you, since the murder of George Floyd in 2020, my work with organizations has always been about be patient. If you're serious about the work, there's a commitment by leadership, and that you've got people in your decision-making tree that represent diversity, you've got to be patient about the work, because this work takes time. You're going to run across issues that you've never run across before, because this is a very different lane or a very different line of business than what you've been traditionally accustomed to. But if you develop those relationships, if you're patient, if you ask questions, and if you work in collaboration with others and you're inclusive, you can make these projects happen. And so that is the essence of how do you bring equity into electrifying freight? And I'll be happy to answer any questions moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. We're gonna hold your questions for a moment, but thank you, Steve. You were amazing. Great way to level set the conversation. I'm just gonna run through a couple of quick slides for folks. Laurel, if you can pull them up for me.
Just one second.
I'm not seeing them unless they're already out. Oh, okay. Cool. All right, so you can go to the next slide. So what I wanted to do first is remind everyone that this is the 30th anniversary of Clean Cities. We have been in the clean energy, clean transportation, and environmental protection and justice space for a long time. There are 75 plus clean cities between here and Hawaii, and look to try to connect with them. About 20 of the clean city offices are really digging deep into the environmental energy and environmental justice and equity space, and the transportation as well, and energy. So look to collaborate with them. Our office is, as indicated, can definitely provide you a lot of technical assistance and support in this area. And go to the next slide. So one of the things I think it's really important is to think about how you're going to get started. All right. This is something we hear a lot about from folks. They just don't know where to go. Right. And you want to make sure that first you identify the why. Some of the public sector folks are being pushed by their local officials. Some of the private sector people are being pushed by neighbors and their corporate boards or new management who want to see them do some things differently. But they've got to figure out what's the why, and not just the why for the short term, but for the long term. Because Steve is right, these issues take time, and you want to be a good public and private sector corporate citizen. And so you want to figure out what the why is. Why are we doing it? Why are we going to go through all these things? and why does it matter from a civic perspective, from a business or public sector perspective, and also from a human health perspective. We didn't really get into the why it matters around transportation. For those of you who are not aware, the transportation sector is the largest contributor to greenhouse gases. And in terms of the impact on public health, from an equity perspective, African Americans and other folks of color, especially Latinos, we are disproportionately impacted by pollution. And so any effort you make towards, with a good plan to put cleaner fuel vehicles, especially electric fleets, in disadvantaged communities, whether they're delivery drivers, whether they're your bus depots, whether your school buses, whether they're your trains, right? Or your boats, right? At your ports. All of those things can improve public health, because the number one reason why kids miss school is because of asthma. Many folks are running around these neighborhoods, generations of them, thinking that asthma is hereditary and there's nothing that they can do about it, and they actually can. The other thing is identifying the who on your team. So it needs, I believe in a bottom-up approach. However, management in both the middle and executive management must improve, must set that standard, right? Because if management is not driving it, but if the workers are not buying into it, culture becomes one of the things that you have to address. Identifying the who is going to lead it. A lot of local governments right now, a lot of private sector folks have not figured this out, right? So I see a lot of equity task force and commissions and all that. 99% of the time, public sector entities are putting out these equity plans and equity this for jobs and this, et cetera. Almost never do I see fleets and how we're going to improve transportation equity and the deployment of cleaner technologies like EVs into underserved areas. Almost never do I see it. And I read a lot of studies and reports. So we've got to be able to wrap our hands around that. And that's something we're going to be sharing with elected officials when we roll out this report this fall. Identifying the when and the how. If you don't set goals and timetables, if you don't figure out how you're going to finance the fleet, if you don't figure out how you're going to get there, there's a saying that if you fail to plan, you plan to fail, right? And sometimes in the public and private sector, everything else comes before something like this. And what we find is that I often teach our students and team members that if you buy 10 cars, right? Say you're doing a public parking enforcement, or say you got a pizza delivery, or you got a UPS, or you have a US Postal cars or trucks you're gonna send out. And if you buy 10 of them, right? And you say, we're operating in, say, Upper Marlboro, Maryland, where I live, right? We're gonna deploy them all throughout Upper Marlboro, right? If we give every section one vehicle, is that fair or is that equitable? Right? It's fair, but it's not always equitable. And that's the key thing that I want you all to get today. Equity means that those communities that have borne the burden of bad air, bad transportation policies, have a higher concentration of those vehicles, that you're mapping that and saying, you know what, we're going to buy these, we're going to lease some vehicles, we're going to purchase these vehicles, but we're going to be very careful in making sure that we're not just going to give it to the senior managers. We're not just going to make sure that every area gets it, but we're going to be intentional on our efforts to make sure that those communities that we know, that when we talk to Greater Washington and other subject matter experts, that these are where we're going to deploy them first, so that we can be a true good public or corporate citizen. All right, go to the next slide. The other thing I think that's really, really important, and please understand this, equity is beyond just replacing the vehicles. I can't tell you how many times I hear folks say, oh, we got to get 50 this, we got to get, our bosses said we've got to replace all our vehicles within the next 5 years, or they got all these goals, and we got all these ESG goals, we already have all these sustainability goals, and we have all these climate goals and all that. But it's more than that, right? So these are a couple bullets I want you to think about. And we'll get into, in our guide, we'll break a lot more of this down. And when we get to the conference in September, we'll try to give you some more nuggets that you can look at. All right. So one of the things that's really important for you is to think about that you diversify worker training, right? This is one of the early things for as you think about your equity lens. And so when you think about fleets, many of the fleets are going to have to upskill, retrain their workers, right, for electrification. And that's going to be at a rapid rate for the next 15 to 20 years, right? And you're going to need to make sure that you have an equity lens when you're thinking about who you want to offer training to, so that people from EJ communities are not left behind, both current workers and prospective workers, right? If they're current workers, there's different funding that you can probably tap into, right? With your workforce development boards. There's a number of private and public grants around worker training in the electrification space to help people learn some of the training on how to drive the vehicles, how to maintain the vehicles, how to maintain the charging that's necessary, which is a whole nother thing. You want to make sure that you're not totally beholden to an outside vendor for maintaining your chargers or maintaining your vehicles, and the whole ecosystem that goes with that, from maintaining your building to the equipment that your folks will be driving. So you want to make sure that diversify your worker training. And I'm going to get to these next two things. We want to have some discussion with you all as well. So I talked earlier about the equity in deployment, right? So this is really, really important for you folks, whether they're delivery people, whether they're snow plowing folks, whether they're the ones who are with trash trucks, or they're just ones that are, Domino's is going electric, right? A lot of these different folks. So we need people thinking about how you deploy your deployment strategy of these vehicles, not just being fair, but being equitable, not just in one market, but across your entire footprint of your company as well. And there are things that we can do, and some of our partners that can help you with project management, research, and technical assistance, and coaching as well, because as Steve indicated, there's going to be a lot of coaching you're going to need to do, right? And you're not alone. The last thing I want to talk about as you talk about replacing your fleets is supplier diversity. Woo! woo, I see Luis McDonald on here today, and Quentin, and a number of folks who can help you with project planning, assessment of your buildings, help you where you may want to purchase new vehicles that are electric. You may want to lease new vehicles that are electric. You need to look at what type of power you're going to need, what type of plumbing you're going to need, what type of concrete you're going to need, drywall replacement when you pull all that stuff. We're going to have to may have to reline some streets and things like that. You may have to tear some things down. And so there's a whole ecosystem of minority and women-owned businesses that you can tap into that can help you meet some of your equity strategies, which not only include the deployment, but the workers, but also utilizing diverse suppliers and vendors. If you're looking to engage the community around some of your fleet transition to EVs, you may want to hire a for-profit or nonprofit consultant that can help you with that, with some of those efforts as well. And so I'm going to wrap up. I think that's my last slide, right? We got one more slide. So save the date on Wednesday, October 4th. You can register today. You can go right to our website and register for the conference. And we'll have a lot more of these. We've been doing a lot of things on fleet, on the equity space, especially with fleets as well. And hopefully a couple of these nuggets will be good for you as you move forward. So we want to go around and take some questions from some of our participants. And we'll also look at seeing what some of the folks who are on the call are doing in the as they plan for equity or the transition their fleets to electrification. So I'm going to say, I see my guy, David Hill. Is that David Hill from Prince George's County Public Schools?
Yes, that is correct. Yes.
Oh, good to see you. How are you doing?
I'm doing just great.
Good, good. So how you guys have some very ambitious goals for electrifying your fleet, and what are some of the things you're trying to do to, one, get those buses on the road, but also try to put equity into your strategy, and how can we help you as well?
Absolutely. Well, for our summer school program, we did deploy our first electric bus.
Oh, congratulations.
Yes, so that bus is on the road right now. We do keep stats on the bus every single day, and we have 20 more scheduled to be in here around October, November timeframe that we plan to deploy and put them on the road also.
All right.
And our plans are, we want to partner with Prince George's County also, so we can be on the same team and kind of spread things around to make sure we are doing the same thing. So that's our goal right now. And we are going to start talks with PG County on the school side and PG County side.
All right. Well, excellent, excellent. And we work very closely with Erica and her boss and all the good folks over there, and FN and Rick Hilmer in the transportation and public works sector. So anything we can do to help you all, we're here to help. Okay.
Well, thank you very much. And you have been quite helpful. So thank you again. I appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, let's go around. I got a few folks on here. I'm gonna call on a few folks. If any questions for Steve. Now, Steve, you know, you've been working with the private sector a lot. What's for the private sector people? Give us one or two nuggets you can suggest to people, especially if they got a corporate leader that wants to do it, but they got oftentimes as middle management that's moving slow.
Yeah, I would say, first of all, you can't use the same model of looking at total cost of ownership and the return on the investment, right? You've got to have a bigger goal in mind, right? And part of that is that as a corporate organization, how are you playing this so that you can be a leader in this space, right? Because believe it or not, Gen Z and others are looking at you and saying, we want to do business with corporations that have our same values, And I can tell you that many of the values they're looking at is how are you being a good steward of the environment. And so that's why it's important to get your message out, right? So make sure your messaging is right externally, but also as important internally as well. Because again, others within the organization have various goals, right? They've got a budget they've got to meet. They've got certain other criterias. But if you get that right message and you get those champions, you can bring the project along, because now you'll have agreement on certain criterias, and make sure it is part of the board's goals in terms of looking at the work that they're doing. Because once you get the board saying this is important, and you get senior leadership saying this is important, everyone else has to figure it out, right? We all know that's how it works, right? If the boss says this is what we're doing, okay, this is what we're doing. So I've got to figure out how to make that happen. That's what I would say.
All right, all right. Thank you, thank you. All right, so we'll go around and call on a couple other folks I see on here. Let me see who would be good. Maya, what organization are you with?
Hi, I'm with WMATA.
Oh, my lucky draw, huh? You got the lucky draw. So, Maya, how's everything going with WMATA? You're a big institution. For those who don't know, they're one of our big transit agencies around the DMV area. And so, Maya, thanks for being here. How is the organization moving? I know you got a lot of folks every one of your board meetings saying more needs to be done, right?
Yeah, so I'm project manager in the zero emission vehicles team. So this conversation is really interesting because we just wrapped up our transition plan earlier this year. And we do have an equity kind of section and focus and recommendations, but it is tricky to translate that into something actionable, as you guys have mentioned that the organization explicitly values. I mean, it's kind of innate, but it is secondary to like facility designs and just deploying to beds and just getting beds. So yeah, it is, I agree with you guys. It's not just like, it's kind of a top-down thing. It's really hard to kind of push this as like an individual staff level. So that's kind of where we are. It's valued, but it's I think we're trying to think through ways to explicitly have measurable and discrete ways to think about equity and the ZEB transition. So yeah, it's a combination of data plus really like top-down values.
Nice. Thank you. Any reaction to that, Steve? Any thoughts on that? I mean,
Yeah.
That's not uncommon, right? I mean, everyone wants to get vehicles out there, but that equity issue of how we deploy it, who's getting trained, who's at the table, and it's the same. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu, right?
Exactly.
So what nugget would you suggest to Maya on how she can continue? It's not whether they did was bad, it's just they need to add some additional pieces. What would you friendly advice would you give?
Right. I'm a big fan of poaching, right? So it's important to look to see what other cities are doing what, right? This way you're able to kind of draw on the experience that they've had, which is one of the reasons why we have the, Electric Freight Consortium. And in doing that, at least it provides a framework for you. Now, if you've done that, you've looked at it, you say, okay, here are some ideas that we've had. How do we make it stick and work for us?
Sure.
That's always the trick and the challenge. And
Right.
I would say what's important is you've also got to get external voices to support what you're looking for.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Sometimes internally, right, you can't make it happen. But when you get your other stakeholders or the community involved in saying, these are some of the things we want to see happen, and it might be inviting one or two really dynamic community leaders to your meeting so they can get the ideas, and maybe somebody needs to talk with them offline and say, if you're interested in this, these are the things you should push on, right? Sometimes you need to have someone providing some external support.
Yeah.
And so it's important that if someone can make that conversation happen, then the community can understand and say, oh, you mean if we focus in on these things, this is what we can get? And a very brief example, I used to, at Cornell, I was a shop steward. And so we were working around negotiations for the team. And one of the things I said is, look, Cornell has a lot of money, right? They don't want to give us this money in salary. Why don't we say you provide tuition reimbursement for everybody else, provide it for us, but at the rate that Cornell University requires that their credits are paid for. So you can go anywhere, and get those credits. So again, if you're thinking creatively, also make sure you're using those other partners to bring that information in so that they can push from the outside. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
All
Okay,
right.
that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. And we're here to help, Maya. We'll be making a number of announcements for things around equity in this sector over the next 2 months. So we'll
Okay.
definitely out to you. Okay.
Okay. Sounds good.
So Steve, we only have a couple minutes left. Any final comments?
Yeah, I would say that, once you're working collaboratively, you'll see that the issues and the problems that you have may not always be able to be easily solved, but you can find partners that can help provide you with information and support. Many of us are new to this, right? We've been working on it for 5 years, maybe 7 years. So everyone's trying to figure this out and everyone's trying to make their projects happen. Again, that level of patience, but making sure that you don't take all the pressure on yourself and say, who else can I bring in as a stakeholder that can help support the work that I'm looking to do? And like David said, making sure you're working with other partners so you can partner in and get that information up and going. I see a hand. Is that right, Lewis?
Well, no, I was trying to make a. Wait, I didn't want to interrupt what you're saying. Go ahead.
Go ahead, please.
No, I just wanted to say before it ends here that I've been knocking on the door of Robbie Diamond for years, talking about the federal fleet equity issue, supplier diversity. And so I'm very glad to meet you, be introduced to you by Antoine. Antoine just recently did a white paper on the issue that we discussed with Robbie Diamond. And I would really like for us to get together with him and discuss that, because we definitely would appreciate the support of the Electrification Coalition with the federal fleet. They should be the leader in the electrification, 650,000 plus vehicles, and the issue of supplier diversity and equity is very key. I know it's a priority with Antoine, and now I see that we can get your support with Robbie, and I think we'll be able to, get through and score a touchdown.
Yeah, definitely get my email address. Let's talk. Let's arrange a meeting.
Yeah.
I would love to talk about that.
Yes, absolutely.
Good
All
to
right,
meet you.
Thank you, Luis. Before we wrap up, I just want to share a couple closing comments. One is, if you like what you heard today, become a member of our coalition. If you're not a member-based type thing, make a contribution. If you need some help in this space, we have a number of smart people that are on our team, and we have other vendors that are members that can be of help as well. Also, next Friday, we will release on our website a list of vendors and consultants that you will be able to go to that website as a resource for everything from cabling to leasing vehicles to installing EV chargers to project managers to electricians and contractors, all that are members of our coalition. People are asking about a one-stop place that they can go. So next Friday, Laurel and our team will make sure that it's available on our website, and we will thoroughly promote that because people are looking for reliable vendors that can assist them both in the public and private and residential sectors. So that will be available next week. The last thing I want to mention is that getting your vehicles out on the road to be electric is not just enough. We must be very intentional in making sure that the communities that suffer the most don't get the electric vehicles last, right? Oftentimes we forget about the workers. Many workers are driving diesel powered delivery trucks and work trucks think about those workers as well, and think about the neighborhoods that those vehicles are idling in for hours at a time and every minute, and the impact that that is having on the workers, but also on the residents in those areas. So as we think about fleet equity, it does require conviction, it requires leadership, it requires vision, but also important, it requires a plan for progress so that the bottom of the frontline workers and the management and executive leadership all understanding that it won't happen without them. And as Steve indicated, bring community and subject matter experts to the table, because together you can get it done in a great way. Without further ado, I want to thank Steve. I want to thank our team for putting on this event, and we'll talk to you soon. Have a great day.